Well, the homeless are in the news, as they often are. And I thought I'd just do a little video on the homeless because I've had a lot of experience with the homeless. I started working in Center City, Philadelphia in 1968, downtown, in a multi-level parking garage. And from that point until I left there in 1983, like 16 years, I constantly interacted with the homeless. Got to know maybe 100 of them, maybe more over those years. My first run-in with the homeless was quite interesting. I was 16 years old. I was still in high school, Catholic school, being told to be a good Christian kid and act like a Christian and do things the way Christ would do, yada yada yada. And when I started down there, one of the things the boss told me was we had a restroom, little men's room and a little women's room, and they had cipher locks on them. And the sign said, customers only. And he told me, in no uncertain terms, do not let any of the Robians, people on Skid Row, we used to call Skid Robians or just shortened Robians, don't let any of them into the men's room. I said, well, it's a public restroom. He said, look, just don't let them in. Believe me, don't let them in. Sure enough, about a week later, after I had started, very early, I'm over by the restroom, and this disheveled guy, Robian, comes up to me and, hey, kid, hey, man, and literally, he's got his hand on his ass. He's holding his ass. I got shit real bad, man. Can you help me use the restroom? I said, no, sorry, sir, but our policy is customers only, and I'm not allowed that yet. Oh man, you look like a good kid, help out a man. Let me, I don't want to have shit on the street. Let me have some dignity, blah, 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 blah. So I said, well, all right. So I did the cipher thing, let him in. I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes later, the bosses called me up, said, did you let one of those bums into the men's room? I said, yeah, Wes, I'm sorry, I did. He said, let me show you something. So he opens the door, and the guy indeed had to take a shit. The toilet was filled with it. The toilet was covered with it. The inside of his stall was covered with it. The walls, the inside of the divide, the door, all covered with shit. The mirror was covered with shit. The sink was covered with shit. The inside of the door was covered with shit. The doorknob was covered with shit. There was shit all over the floor, shit all over the walls. He'd even thrown shit on the ceilings. And he said, are you going to clean this up? I said, no. Yeah, if I lose my job, I'll find another job. It was already my second job. He said, well, you're lucky. I'm just going to leave it here, and we're going to lock it up. And there's a guy we have contracted to come and clean Sunday nights before we, it was a Sunday night. He said, he'll clean it. But he said, don't you ever let anybody in again. And as a rule, I never did. So that was my first run-in with the homeless. And, of course, my initial reaction was to do the Christian thing. And, I turned out getting shit on, literally. Now, over the years, all the other ones came in. And after a while, you realize what you're dealing with. I would say that over all the years down there and all the homeless I dealt with, I would say about less than 10% were what I call transient homeless. These were people who you'd see, sometimes you see them a couple of days in a row. They'd sit in our lot because there were seats there, and there were soda machines and a cigarette machine. A lot of people smoked in those days, and a candy machine, chips and stuff. So they'd hang out there, and they didn't bother anybody for the most part. They were just there, and if they weren't disruptive or too smelly, I wouldn't make a move as long as there were additional seats left. Although customers usually didn't want to sit next to them. But you get to know them, you talk to them, and there were a lot of people who just were what I think this is the ideal of homelessness. These are people who either maybe made a bad decision, had bad luck, lost their jobs, then they lost their cars and they lost their apartments, and now they were out on the street. And they were just homeless. There was nothing, inherently wrong with them. If they hadn't lost their job, they wouldn't be homeless. They had made some bad decision they made, or whatever they did. But you didn't see them for a good length of time. They'd be around for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and then they'd be gone. And they would find some job. They would find some organization to help them. I remember there was one guy I knew down there, and a couple of years later, I found him. I dropped some stuff off at I don't know, it was Goodwill or Salvation Army where I lived in New Jersey, and there he was. He was working over there. They'd given him a job. He had shared a room or a little apartment with two guys, and he had an income, and he wasn't living on the streets anymore, and and that was great. And I've seen some people like that, and they would just come and go. Now, the people you saw long term down there, who were over 90% of the homeless, were the solid homeless. And these people, if you got to know them, were all crazy, had mental issues. I started down there in the 60s and the early 70s, when a lot of them, if you talk to them, they had, I remember there was one infamous guy, his name was Center City Sam. He was infamous because he used to harass young women coming out of the office buildings on their way to the train or the subway. And he was really bad. He was notorious, and they hated him. I mean, I actually had a friend who met his eventual wife because she called our parking lot to come over and help her because he was in their place of business. She was alone, and he was giving her a hard time. She was scared shitless. That's how they met. They ended up getting married. I think, as far as I know, they're still married. He was the cause of that. But Center City Sam made the papers once because a woman he had continually harassed, who worked over in the Packard building on 15th Street between Chestnut and Sansom. She put a brick in her handbag, and when he came out, she had told him to leave her alone. And when he didn't, and he came out, she came out and he was there. Then one day, she hit him over the head with it and split his skull open. But Center City Sam, whom I knew, and he used to come by and talk to me, he used to brag that he had been the star of the Byberry State Hospital mental hospital softball team. Now, I don't know that he was the star. I don't even know if he could play softball, but I had no doubt that he had been there. And he, like many of the other people that I met on the street who had been to Byberry, had been released in the 60s and early 70s because of the lawsuits and all the other things about, how terrible state hospitals were. And all these guys were dumped out on the streets. So there was Center City Sam, homeless, sleeping in cardboard boxes in our alley, harassing women left and right. And he also, make matters worse, he was a racist. He didn't like black people, and he would say that he didn't like black people to their face. And that one night, I didn't know until afterwards, but he came around, and I had heard what happened to him. He said something about black people to the wrong black person, and the guy pulled out a razor blade and slit his throat. He almost died. So that was Center City Sam's life out on the street. But the problem is, some people like him are clearly not with it. There are other people who aren't quite so obvious. And if you look at them, you can talk to them, you might think that they're normal. Now, we had one guy who was around for years. We used to call him Bob the Bum. And Bob didn't look like a bum. Bob was really an interesting character. He didn't dress like a bum at all. He wore a suit. Now, admittedly, it looked like a suit he found in a dump somewhere or something. But he wore a shirt, and he always had a tie on. And he wore one of those little hats. I forget what they're called, but they're the kind of hat that Frank Sinatra would have been wearing in the 60s. And he always wore a thin tie. So he looked like somebody out of a GQ, and not the GQ existed then, but if there had been GQ in 1962, somebody would have been dressed like Bob, and that's how Bob dressed. But Bob was clean. He was one of the few guys that I eventually let use our restroom, and he would clean up in there. Not only would he clean up in there, one time I went in And he had cleaned himself up. He was in the process. He didn't like our restroom because it was too dirty. He said, you know, you're not maintaining this properly. So he was in there with Windex and paper towels and air freshener, and he was cleaning up in our restroom. So here's like the first bum I met, you know, spread feces all over our restroom, and here's Bob cleaning up our restroom. One time he even brought in some Sackcrete. He was fixing problems with the cement. I mean, the guy was fastidious about cleanliness. So I used to let him go in there, and I actually gave him some space where he could store his stuff because he had accumulated a lot of stuff. And one of his favorite things he used to like to do was he'd go through the trash cans till he found his favorite source of news, which was the Wall Street Journal. So you would see this guy be sitting in one of our chairs, or sometimes he'd sit over on the bench where the workers sat, because everybody knew him, and you know, he was okay. And he'd be sitting over there. He might have a cigarette. He'd have his little hat on. He'd have his legs crossed. He always had a pair of shiny loafers. And he'd be reading the Wall Street Journal. And if you walked up and you sat next to him, you'd probably, you know, think he'd just come out of a union labor, or maybe he was down from the Philly Exchange or someplace. And you could talk to him. He seemed perfectly normal. He'd talk about the market. He would talk about trade policy. He'd talk about any number of things. He was up on things because, I mean, this guy read the Wall Street Journal every day. I wasn't even doing that every day. I was too busy. And, you know, I remember several times I asked him, or my friend Mick asked him, Bob, you know, why are you living on the street? He said, well, you know, I was doing really good, but then, you know, things happen. What can I say? That's the way it goes. It's life, you know. So, yeah, we never could get a story out of him about what was on. But we thought maybe he was like a stockbroker. We had these images of, you know, and he was doing well, but then everything collapsed. His wife left him. Who knows? I don't know what happened. But one day he was sitting on the bench and reading his Wall Street Journal in his suit, his little hat. And my friend Mick and I were talking. It was slow. And I was in history, my graduate degree. Mick was doing his undergraduate work at Drexel in business administration, but he had to take some history courses. So it was, I guess it was toward the end of the semester, and he had a final coming up on European history. So he's asking me all these questions about, you know, World War II and Hitler and the rise of fascism and all this stuff. And I'm, you know, giving him the answers in the background and trying to help him out. And all of a sudden, Bob says, hey, he used to talk like that. Hey, I knew those guys. And Mick and I, we looked at each other and we said, who do you know? Hitler, Adolf, and Benito Mussolini. I knew them. This is a new twist on Bob. I said, how'd you know them? You know? Oh, every Sunday they used to come to dinner at my mom's house. And when I was a kid, and we'd have Sunday dinner, and Adolf and Benito would be there. So Mick and I are looking at each other now, like, okay. I mean, the ages, you know, maybe he was a kid in the 30s. Me, I guess he had a mother. Maybe she had Sunday dinners. But I mean, the idea that Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler were crossing, they'd have to fly every week to Philadelphia to have dinner with his mother and him. No, I mean that. You know, you could pretty well be assured that without doing a documentary search, a record search, that didn't happen. I mean, I had read a lot about World War II and Adolf Hitler and the rise of the Nazis, but I don't ever remember, you know, Adolf and Benito coming to town on Sundays to have dinner with Bob the Bum's mother. So at this point, we're thinking, oh, geez, you know, maybe Bob's a little crazier than we thought. So he said, really, you know, Bob, they both came. Oh, he said, you know, some weeks they couldn't make it. They were too busy, you know, with conquest shit, you know, like that, you know. But yeah, most weeks they were there, and my mom would make dinner, and, you know, we'd all talk. And I said, oh, what you talking about? I said, oh, the fucking Jews. You know, we got to kill all the Jews. We got to get rid of all the Jews in this country now. You know, Hitler didn't go far enough. Hitler is going to kill all the Jews. We say, kill the Jews. Blah, 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 blah. He goes into this, you know, rabid anti-Semitic thing about, you know, how, you know, him and his mom used to talk with Adolf and Benito about how we needed to cleanse the world of Jews at Sunday dinner back in the 1930s in Philadelphia. And, oh, okay, Bob, Mick, I think we need to get back to work. We went back to work. But I mean, I remember talking about that afterwards. It was like, oh my God, we thought this guy was like close to normal, but in reality was, you just had to wait until you got him to that moment, and then bingo, you could see he's out there, you know, uh, you know, in outer space. The idea, I mean, this guy truly believed that he used to have dinner with Hitler and Mussolini with his mom and talk about killing the Jews. Uh, it was, but that's when you have to step back and you say, what I'm looking at with these homeless people. I mean, they may be overtly crazy, mentally challenged, but even the ones who aren't overtly mentally challenged, if you get to know them a little bit and you get to, talk with them, and then ultimately it comes out and you realize that and there were other cases like that too, where we deal with people and they would seem normal until eventually something would happen and then they'd just go wacko. But you couldn't meet them once and make a judgment. I mean, some you could, but many of them you couldn't. If you met them, other than the fact that they were disheveled and probably dirty and smelled, but beyond that, talking to them, they would seem, absolutely normal, as was the case with that guy I met back in 1968 who, appealed to my Christianity and all the other things to get into the bathroom, and then proceeded to smear it with, he went from acting normal to acting abnormal. And that's the problem with them. Just, when you're down, you're a reporter and you talk to a couple of them and you come out, you're not going to, unless you talk to them day in and day out for like a year or two, you're not going to get to know what's going on, behind the facade. And that's what I see in the media and the reporting. And it also means that, you're not going to fix this with better housing policies. If Los Angeles had cheaper housing, I mean, no, these people aren't going to find housing. I mean, I dealt with these people. I had a friend who was homeless down there for a while. I'd gone to high school with him. He'd had a mental breakdown and he ended up down there. You could give him money. I could say, okay, here's what you need for a flop house, up on 16th and Sanson. Live up there cheap. It's just a room, roach infested, but to get you off the street. I could give him the money, but it would just disappear. And you can't do that. I mean, these people couldn't live in a home. And I knew how much. I used to know how much the was it YMCA or whatever it was down there. They had a shelter basically for the homeless, but they had rules. You had to be in by 8 o'clock. You had to be out by 8 o'clock the next day. You had to take a shower before you got into your cot because these guys were filthy. And if you didn't get a shower and get into a clean gown that they would give you for the night, you just infect the bed that they were giving you with lice and bed bugs and everything else, and they'd have problems. So those were the rules. No drugs, no alcohol, in by 8, out by 8, shower. And my friend would not go there. So why don't you just go down there? Why, it's 8 degrees out. It's going under zero tonight. You're going to be out on the street. I'll give you the money. What's it cost? It was like, I don't know how much it was, $250 or something like that a night. No, I don't want to do that. I'm not abiding by their rules. I'm not getting a shower. It'll just make things worse the next day when I come out. I'll be even colder. So, I mean, providing housing for them, it isn't going to work. You give them money for food. How many times did I give money to people for food, and you'd see them, go across to the bar drinking. I used to do it every now and then just as an experiment. I said, well, they have food right over there, Ed's Tavern. And of course, then I'd wait 15 minutes to go in, and they'd be drinking down whiskey or beer or whatever it was. There was no food out. I mean, it's you can't do that. What really, I mean, I'm sorry, the bottom line is, if you don't want to have these people wandering around homeless, is institutionalize them. And if you're not ready to do that, you can give them, I guess, a lot of treatment and stuff like that. My friend who was homeless ultimately did kind of level out, with the help of antipsychotic drugs. Uh, and then from the age of about 20, 21, until he died about 2 years ago, he lived on Social Security disability, state aid, Medicaid in Pennsylvania. They pay for his living expenses, his apartment. He had internet. He had a little computer. They paid for all those things, but he never worked. He didn't work from the time he was a teenager until he died at 65 about. And he's one of the success stories. They actually got him in an apartment and he was okay. But a lot of these people, are worse than him, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to go there. So I don't, beyond institutionalizing people, I don't really know what the solution is. We can work around the edges a little bit. I mean, part of the problem, I don't think, is there's so many more homeless. It's just I think they migrate and they know where to go. You go places where it's warm. And where would you want to be homeless? In Boston or Los Angeles. If I was homeless, I'd see if I could make my way to LA. Temperatures. You don't have the brutal heat in the summer or the brutal cold in the winter. I'd much rather be in LA on the streets than I would be in Boston. So I think people flood to Boston, to Los Angeles, not just because of their policies. They certainly have a very welcoming homeless policy, but because of other things. But we can move them around with our policies. You can attract people to LA instead of going to Tampa or Houston or something. But I don't know that we can do much to change the numbers of homeless. And it's awfully hard to count them anyway, because you have all these people coming and going. Beyond that, I don't know what it is, but I know a lot of what I do see, people really have no idea who they're dealing with or what it is that they're talking about.